Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Join the official Telegram channel of Rao's IAS Study Circle to stay updated and get all the materials on the Telegram. The link to the channel can be found in the description box. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading from our UPSC Civil Services examination perspective. Now today, let's take up the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 16th March 2022. Now these are the list of the news which we'll be taking up for today's discussion, and the YouTube description also provides for these news along with timestamp. So on this note, let's start our today's discussion both from our prelims and mains perspective. Now the first news for our today's discussion is regarding the Karnataka High Court judgment on an important controversy regarding wearing of hijab in school. Now the schools in Udupi district in Karnataka had banned wearing of hijab by girls, and this had created a lot of controversy with respect to wearing hijab as being part of their fundamental rights under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. However, the High Court of Karnataka in its judgment has stated that wearing of hijab is not an essential practice or an essential part of Islamic religion, and accordingly has restrained all students not only from wearing hijab but also saffron shawls or any other religious flags. Further, the High Court has also stated that there is a purpose of providing uniform in the schools, and wearing hijab will defeat that purpose because it will segregate or differentiate between those girls wearing hijab and those girls not wearing hijab. Further, the High Court has also stated that wearing of hijab is not mandatory even as per Islamic law, and even the Quran does not mention about wearing of hijab as an essential religious practice without which the practice of Islam would not be complete. However, there is another side to the same coin. As you can see, these news appearing on page number 5, which states that order of the High Court violates freedom of religion. So on one hand, the High Court has stated that wearing of hijab is not an essential religious practice and hence should not be worn in schools, because in schools the whole idea of providing uniform is to eliminate this particular difference between different kind of people, be it rich, poor or from different religion. So the whole idea of providing uniform in schools and colleges is to ensure that the idea of social separateness does not arise or does not emanate. Now this particular judgment of the Karnataka High Court has been appealed in the Supreme Court of India. So let's wait for the judgment of Supreme Court, especially regarding the aspect of essential religious practice and wearing hijab, especially regarding the aspect of fundamental right under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. Further, the news appearing on page number 5 also says, don't deny education to girls, says women group, because wearing of hijab allow these girls to go to public places including schools. So this is another side of the story where the girls are demanding their fundamental rights, including their right to choice with respect to wearing hijab. And it is in this regard this news says that won't return to class without hijab the petitioners. So the court, while hearing this entire issue, framed the following questions. Number 1, whether wearing hijab is essential religious practice in Islamic faith protected under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, which is also a part of fundamental right. Next, whether prescription of school uniform is violative of such rights. And third, whether the government order of 5th February, apart from being incompetent and manifestly arbitrary, violates Article 14 and 15, namely to ban wearing of hijab. So here let's understand about Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, which is a part of fundamental rights and provides for right to freedom of religion. So Article 25 says freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion. However, this article starts with the point that subject to the aspect of public order, morality and health. So these are the 3 grounds on which the state can regulate religious practices. So it says that subject to public order, morality and health and to the other provisions of this part, all persons are equally entitled to freedom of conscience and right freely to profess, practice and propagate religion. So the question was that, was ban on wearing of hijab in schools violated the fundamental right to freely profess and practice Islamic religion. Now further, this provision under Article 25 says that state can regulate certain aspects of religious practice. So it says that the state can make law with respect to regulating or restricting. So it's talking about both regulation and also restriction. And in this case, restriction on wearing of hijab in schools. So it says that state can regulate or restrict any economic, financial, political or other secular activity which may be associated with religious practice. So the fundamental right to freedom of conscience, free profession, practice and propagation of religion is not absolute. State can regulate these aspects on public order, morality and health, and also the state can either regulate or restrict any aspect of religious practice pertaining to economic, financial, political or secular activity which can be associated with religious practice. Further, the provision says that the state can also provide for social welfare and reform with respect to any religion or throwing open of Hindu religious institution of a public character to all classes and sections of Hindus. So again we see that state has the power to regulate these aspects of religious practices. Now Article 25 also comes with two explanations. Let's go through these explanations. The first explanation says that wearing and carrying of kirpans shall be deemed to be included in the profession of the Sikh religion, and hence wearing of kirpan becomes an essential religious practice of the Sikh religion. And the second explanation says that with respect to reference to Hindus here, that is Hindu religious institution, the term Hindu shall be construed as including reference to persons professing Sikh religion, Jain religion or Buddhist religion. So we understand that Article 25 of the Indian Constitution not only provides for freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion, but it also allows state to regulate certain aspects of religious practices either on the grounds of public order, morality, health, or the state can regulate any of the secular activity, economic activity, financial aspects or political aspects associated with any religious practice. And the state can also provide for social welfare and reform and also throwing open of Hindu religious institution of a public character to all classes and sections of Hindus. So based on our discussion so far, let us understand that what is the meaning of essential religious practice, or how can we determine that what practices constitutes an essential practice for any religion. Now this aspect of essential religious practice has been debated and discussed in number of judgments and also provided in the Constituent Assembly debates. So the test for essential practices of religion must constitute the core part of that religion, which means without practicing of that core part, it cannot be said that you are practicing that particular religion. So it says that what constitutes an integral or essential part of religion has to be determined with reference to its doctrines, practices, tenets, historical background of the particular given religion. An essential part of a religion means the core beliefs upon which a religion is founded. An essential practice means those practices that are fundamental to follow a religious belief. So it also means that without following these fundamental belief or practices, one cannot say that that particular religion is being followed. It further says that it is upon the cornerstone of essential parts or practices that the superstructure of a religion is built. So it is based on these practices that the structure or superstructure of a particular religion is built upon. And without these superstructures, it cannot be said to be any religion. Now another important part of the test is that if a particular practice of that religion is removed, then can it be said that the nature of that religion has been changed. So it says that the test to determine whether a part or practice is essential to a religion is to find out whether the nature of the religion will be changed without the part or that particular practice. So in this case, if hijab is not worn by women, then can we say that Islamic religion is not being followed? It further says that if taking away that part or practice could result in a fundamental change in the character of that religion, or its belief, then such part could be treated as an essential or integral part of a particular religion. So, removing that part of the religion, if it amounts to a fundamental change in the character of religion, then that part can be said to be an essential practice of that religion. It further says that there cannot be additions or subtractions to such part because it is the very essence of that religion, and alteration will change its fundamental character. And it is such permanent essentials part which are protected by the constitution also. So these are some of the essential points with respect to test for essential practices pertaining to a religion. Now coming to the second question, that is whether prescription of school uniform is violative of any fundamental rights or any of the rights. Now the High Court have stated here that a particular prescription or a school uniform is a kind of reasonable restriction and it is also constitutionally permissible. So the High Court have stated that prescription of school dress code to the exclusion of hijab, bhagwa or any other apparel symbolic or religion can be a step forward in the direction of emancipation and more particularly access to education without any discrimination. So the High Court says that it hardly needs to be stated that this does not rob of the autonomy of women or their right to education in as much as they can wear any apparel of the choice outside the classroom. But if they are within the premises of a classroom, then they have to follow the particular dress code as provided by the school. Because the idea of such dress code is to ensure equality and also to rule out difference while the students are in school. So in this judgment, the High Court also quoted the TMA Pi Foundation case, whereby it stated that an educational institution is established not only for the purpose of imparting education to the students, but in such institution, it is also necessary to maintain discipline and abide by rules and regulations that have been lawfully framed. And accordingly, the High Court held that wearing of hijab will create social separateness which is not desirable, as it will create two kinds of girls, one wearing hijab and other not wearing hijab. And this kind of separation or segregation can be crystallized in the mind of young students, which will defeat the very purpose of providing a school uniform. And accordingly, the High Court says that wearing hijab will offend uniformity designed by dress code of schools, and it will also create an atmosphere where young students will absorb the difference in terms of religion and will create division in the minds of students. So because of all these reasons, the High Court have stated that since wearing of hijab is not an essential practice, and hence it is constitutionally permissible for the schools to ensure uniformity through a dress code or through school uniform. Now, despite this judgment of High Court, certain concerns have been expressed from different sections of the society. And one of the concerns expressed is that this judgment goes against the freedom of choice of young Muslim girls, as it also hampers their liberty and also violates their fundamental right to freedom of religion under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. Further, it has also been argued that banning wearing of hijab for girls will push some of the girls away from educational institutions. And overall, this may also hamper empowerment of women because most of the girls will not go to schools if they are not allowed to wear hijab. So these are some of the concerns which has been expressed against the judgment of Karnataka High Court. Now an appeal has been filed in the Supreme Court of India against this particular judgment of Karnataka High Court. So let's wait for the judgment of Supreme Court regarding fundamental right under Article 25 and essential practices of a particular religion. Now based on our discussion, this becomes your mains practice question. It says critically examine the Karnataka High Court judgment on disallowing wearing of hijab in schools with reference to fundamental right guaranteed under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. Now similar question has been asked by UPSC in the past regarding the judgment of Supreme Court. So the question stated that critically examine the Supreme Court's judgment on National Judicial Appointments Commission Act 2014 with reference to appointment of judges of higher judiciary in India. This question was asked in 2017 and it carried 10 marks. Now another question pertaining to the same topic was asked in 2019. The question was, what can France learn from Indian Constitution's approach to secularism? Now here we must understand that the concept of Indian secularism is based on the idea of principal distance of state with religious practice of an individual or community. So, state can only regulate the religious practices of an individual or a community based on certain grounds as has been highlighted under Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. Whereas in the Western concept of secularism, state maintains a strict separation from religion. So state does not indulge in any religious activity of a particular community. So this is the difference between the Western concept of secularism and Indian concept of secularism. So in this topic of discussion, we need to understand about Article 25, the grounds on which state can regulate religious practices, and also what is the meaning of essential religious practice, or what can be constituted as essential religious practices. Now this topic becomes important mainly from the perspective of GS paper 2 regarding salient features of the Indian Constitution. So after understanding this topic, let's move on to the next article. The next news to be taken up appears as an editorial on page number 6. Now this editorial says about growing prices pressures. Policy makers need to tame inflation or risk it undermining the growth they seek to support. Now this editorial highlights about the increasing prices, which is also reflective in consumer price index, headline WPI inflation, and also retail inflation. Now all these indices has highlighted increase in inflation, and based on this increased inflation in the economy, the editorial suggests that policymakers needs to control inflation, else it will undermine growth. Now this editorial also mentions about consumer confidence survey which is conducted by RBI, which basically reflects the sentiments of consumers with respect to the current situation and also a prospective future situation. And these perceptions helps to understand the future prospect and also its impact on growth of economy. So this editorial highlights about increase in prices of various products including vegetables, protein diets such as meat and fish, edible oil, especially sunflower because of ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, increase in prices of clothing, footwear, fuel, transportation, etc. And the editorial also suggests that because of this ongoing war, the global crude prices can fluctuate, and based on this, the price of petrol and diesel in India can also be increased. Further, the editorial also suggests that because of this war, rupee has also weakened against dollar since the start of this particular conflict. And because of these increasing prices, manufacturers are not able to absorb these increasing pressure of rising prices. And because of this, inflation in manufactured products has increased to 9.84%. So this increase in price of general product leading to inflation is also reflected in RBI's consumer confidence survey. Whereas in this particular survey conducted by the Reserve Bank of India, households have reported overall increase in spending, and this has also impacted consumer confidence. Now this survey is basically conducted by RBI in order to understand the confidence of the consumer. So if the confidence of the consumer is low, that is, if the consumer understands that there is an increase in prices, then this will lead to decline in consumption because the consumer will not like to spend extra or will not like to spend much. And this overall will lead to decline in consumption expenditure. And this decreased confidence of the consumer may negatively impact the GDP growth rate because the consumer will not be interested in spending much in the economy. And this overall will create a negative impact on future growth prospect. So overall, we can say that consumer confidence helps to understand the prospects of future and current economic growth. Now, based on the concept of inflation and its effect, this particular question was asked in the prelims of 2021. So the question was, which one of the following is likely to be the most inflationary in its effect? Options were A. Repayment of public debt, B. Borrowing from the public to finance a deficit budget, C. Borrowing from the banks to finance a budget deficit, and D. Creation of new money to finance a budget deficit. Now in this, the correct answer would be D, because in this option, the government is trying to create new money, whereas in the other option, the money is already there in the market and it is only changing hands, as these two options provide for borrowings from the public and also borrowing from the banks. So the money is already there. It will be borrowed to finance the budget deficit. Whereas in this particular option, new money will be created. That is, new currency will be printed by RBI, and this will create the most inflationary effect. So it's important to understand the impact of inflation and also on growth. Now, from our prelims perspective, you also need to know about the Consumer Confidence Survey, which is published by the Reserve Bank of India. So this survey is conducted by RBI in 13 major cities and covers almost 5,000 respondents. Now this survey measures consumer perception, both current and future. And this perception of consumer is surveyed on 5 economic variables, namely economic situation, employment, price level, income level, and spending of the consumer. So these are the 5 economic variables on which the RBI conducts the Consumer Confidence Survey. And this survey contains 2 indices or comprises of 2 indices, namely the current situation indices and future expectation indices. Now the current situation indices measures the change in consumer perception over an economic issue in the last 1 year, as the name suggests. Whereas the future expectation index measures what consumer thinks about the same variable 1 year ahead. So basically, this survey helps us to find out what does the consumer think with respect to either increase in price in the economy or decrease in price in the economy in the future, and also with respect to the past. So it says that both these indices are compiled on the basis of net responses on economic situation, income, spending, employment, and the price level for the current period and also 1 year ahead, that is for the future as well. Further, a consumer confidence index above 100 point gives optimistic perception. So if the indices goes past 100, then it means the perception is optimistic. That is, the consumer believes that there will be decline in inflation. Whereas indices reading below 100 denotes pessimistic perception. That is, the consumer does not believe that the price will decrease. And as you can see in this particular map, it mentions about current situation index in red color and future expectation index in blue color. And the blue color is above the mark of 100. So the consumer believes that there will be decrease in price in the future. Whereas in the current situation, the consumer is bit pessimistic. So based on this understanding, let's go through the major highlights of the Consumer Confidence Survey of RBI released during January 2022. So it says, consumer confidence for the current period recorded gradual improvement for third successive round of the survey, though it remained in the pessimistic zone. That is, in the current situation, the consumer does not believe that inflation would decrease or there would be decrease in the prices. It then says that the current situation index increased marginally on the back of better sentiments on general economic situation, household income and spending. Whereas 1 year ahead outlook reflected through the future expectation index remained in the optimism zone, which means the consumer believes that in the future inflation would decrease, that is, the prices of commodities would fall. It further says that households reported further increase in overall expenditure driven by higher essential spending, and their sentiments on non-essential outlay, however, remain subdued. So these can be said to be some of the major highlights with respect to Consumer Confidence Survey conducted by RBI in January 2022. Now, based on our discussion so far, these becomes your practice question. So the question is, with reference to Consumer Confidence Survey, consider the following statements. Options are: first, the survey is published by the National Statistical Office. Second, this survey measures the consumer perception on both current and future state of Indian economy. So the question is, which of the statements given above are correct? Options are A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, and D, neither 1 nor 2. Now this question says, consider the following statements. First, the Consumer Confidence Survey has 2 main indices, namely Current Situation Index and Future Expectations Index. And second, CSI and FEI are compiled on the basis of net responses on the economic situation, income, spending, employment, and the price level for the current period as compared with 1 year ago and a year ahead. The question here is, which of the statements given above are incorrect? Options are A. 1 only, B. 2 only, C. both 1 and 2, and D. neither 1 nor 2. So I hope after our discussion you will be able to answer these questions. Now these topics of inflation, especially with respect to difference between WPI, that is wholesale price index, and consumer price index, has been discussed in detail by Baswa sir in part 2 of the economic survey of 2021-22, and this is also available on YouTube. So you can go through these important discussion by Baswa sir on economic survey, not only to understand about WPI and CPI, but also to understand the variation in consumer price index, as has been discussed in detail by Baswa sir in the economic survey. So this news becomes important mainly from the perspective of Indian economy, and from this news discussion, you should remember about RBI's consumer confidence survey. With this, let's take up our next news for discussion. The next news to be taken up appears on page number 9. It says, MPs seek clarity on privatizing Indian Railways. So, this news regarding Indian Railways gets covered under GS paper 3 with respect to infrastructure. According to this news, the members of parliament have raised certain doubt, and they have asked the government whether it intends to privatize Indian Railways. Another doubt which has been raised by the member of parliament is that there is a difference between annual plan proposed for railway and the gross budgetary support provided by the Indian government. So it means that the annual plan of the railways proposed for the next year is around rupees 2.45 lakh crores. And the government support for these funds account for only 55%. So the question which is asked by the MPs is that what about the remaining 45%? That is, what will be the source of meeting this gap? Whether this source will be public-private partnership, that is, money will be raised through public-private partnership, or through disinvestment of some of the parts of Indian Railways. So these are some of the doubts which has been discussed in this particular article. Now, based on this doubt, this becomes our mains practice question. It says, privatization of Indian Railways will not solve all of its problems. Discuss. And this question carries 15 marks. So on this note, let us understand some of the problems which is faced by the Indian Railways. Now, the first problem which is faced by Indian Railway is regarding lack of autonomy. Now, since this is a departmental undertaking, hence it does not have autonomy to take various decisions regarding commercial aspects or fixing of fares, freight charges, or introducing of new trains. And this lack of autonomy impacts the overall operation of Indian Railways. The next concern is that the freight charges have been increased over a period of years. However, the passenger charges or passenger fares have not been increased in the same proportion as that of freight charges. So what has happened is that the freight charges have increased as compared to the passenger charges. And because of this increase in freight charges, the freight which was earlier transported through railways is now transported through roads or national highways, also because the conditions of Indian national highways has improved over a period of years. So this increase in freight has led to decrease in freight traffic as they have moved to roads. The next problem is the higher operating cost of Indian Railways, which is close to 98.4%. This means every 100 rupees earned by the Indian Railways, they have to spend rupees 98.4 on its maintenance. So they are left with very less profit. And this also impacts the overall operation of Indian Railways. The next concern is that there has been a successive decline in investment in railways as a percentage of transport expenditure. Now this means that expenditure in other modes of transport, for example road, aviation, has increased as compared to Indian Railways. The next problem is poor quality of service delivery, especially with respect to passenger trains. As we know, the trains in India not only run late, but there is even poor quality of service delivery in most trains. The next problem is regarding political interference with respect to decision making in the Indian Railways. Now another challenge is that major part of capital investment which is provided for Indian Railways goes into electrification, laying new tracks, or even replacing old tracks. So definitely there is financial problem with respect to Indian Railways. Now to overcome these problems and challenges, the Government of India has earlier introduced public-private partnership mode in the Indian Railway. whereby the private entities will operate trains between different stations. So on this note, let us understand as to how the PPP model in Indian Railways will benefit various stakeholders. So it says that for Indian Railways, it will amount to no political interference in fixing of passenger fares because the private sector can fix their own fare for the train operating between different stations. So for the private sector, it will be complete independence and autonomy to decide on fares on these trains. And for the passenger, they will have greater choice with respect to taking trains which is run by the private sector or by the government. Further, more investment from the private sector will decrease the operating cost of Indian Railways due to higher revenue collections from private sector. Further, for the private sector, there will be scope to earn higher profits as they can fix their fare and also provide other services for which definitely they can charge. And for the passengers in India, they will experience world-class facility provided by these private sectors. Further, the public-private partnership will provide steady income for the Indian Railways, and it will also reduce Indian Railways' reliance on borrowed funds for investment in expanding railways network. And the Indian Railways will borrow less and they will rely less on borrowing aspect for expansion of Indian Railways. Regarding the private sector, this will pave way for higher private sector participation in Indian Railways. Now, as of now, 5% of the routes are opened up for private sector in the Indian Railways. Now, regarding the passengers, they will not only have a choice, but now their tickets will be easily confirmed or they will get confirmed tickets. Now, earlier when we used to reserve seats in the Indian Railways, generally we used to get a waiting list ticket. So giving more choice to the passengers will not only solve the problem of waitlisted passengers, but the private sector will also increase the capacity of Indian Railways overall. So these can be said to be some of the benefits with respect to introducing the public-private partnership in Indian Railways. So in a bid to attract private sector in Indian Railways, the Government of India decided to open up certain routes for the private sector. And as of now, the Tejas Express is operating on such private route as it is run by IRCTC. So Tejas Express can be said to be India's first corporate train as it enjoys autonomy with respect to fixing its own charges or fares. So the government, in order to attract more investment from the private sector, opened up some of the routes and also invited bid from the private sector so that they can run trains on some of these identified routes. However, the private sector has not shown much enthusiasm to run train on these specified routes. And the reasons for poor response from the private sector can be said to be, number one, higher entry barriers, as private entities are required to buy their own fully air-conditioned modern coaches, which will be very costly. So higher cost to run the trains can be said to be one of the major reasons for poor response. Another major concern is regarding higher charges. So these private entities are supposed to pay multiple charges to the Indian Railways in the form of haulage charges, station usage charges, etc. Along with this, they are also required to share certain percentage of the revenue with Indian Railway. Now all this is asking too much from the private sector, because if they invest in the Indian Railways, then they will not like to share a part of their profit. And this will overall also reduce their profit margin. The third concern is regarding lack of level playing field. Now when the private sector will run trains on the track which is controlled by Indian Railway, there is a chance that trains run by Indian Railways will be given priority, not only in terms of signaling, but also with respect to reaching on point or even getting a platform. So it says that trains run by Indian Railways and the private sector will be operating on the same routes. And as of now, there is a lack of clarity regarding level playing field between the trains operated by Indian Railways and the private sector. So it says that, for example, Indian Railway trains may get priority in terms of allotment of platforms, preferential departure, and even arrival timings. Now, this will not only create unfair competition between the private sector and the train run by Indian Railways, but it will also be unreasonable on the part of private sector, because as a part of PPP agreement, if the private sector train do not run on time or reach on time, or if they are late in terms of departure or arrival, then they have to pay extra penalty. So if the signaling is controlled by Indian Railway, then there might be partiality with respect to trains run by Indian Railways. So regarding unfair competition, it says that Indian Railways maintains lower passenger fares through cross subsidization. And this cross subsidization is done by increasing the charge of freights. So it says that similarly, subsidy provided on certain air routes under Uran scheme has led to decline in airfare prices. So on one hand, there is decline in prices of trains run by Indian Railways, whereas the trains will be run by the private sector will definitely increase the charges. So it says that a private sector operating the passenger trains need to fix higher fares to recover its investment, and the higher fares on such private trains vis-a-vis Indian Railway and also cheaper air travel may act as a major obstacle. And the fifth reason for poor response from private sector includes unreasonable terms in the PPP agreement. The first is regarding lack of flexibility for the private entities in changing departure or arrival timings, introducing new halts along the routes, deciding on length of train, etc. Further, according to the agreement, it also provides for key performance indicators such as punctuality, reliability, maintenance of trains, etc. And these are to be met by private entities. An inability to maintain punctuality of trains, so if trains are running late, then they might be penalized. So these indicators are also attached with certain penalty. So it says, for example, if private trains do not arrive or depart on time, they would be required to pay fine. However, the private entities argue that ability to arrive or depart on time will depend on the signaling provided by Indian Railways. So it would be very unfair to force the private entities to pay fines in such instances. Now these can be said to be some of the reasons as to why the private sector is not very keen to invest in Indian Railways. Now regarding modernization of Indian Railways, we also need to know about Bibek Debroy committee, as it suggested setting up of Railway Regulatory Authority of India to ensure success of public-private partnership in Indian Railways. So, from the perspective of your prelims examination, you need to know that the Committee on Railway Modernization was chaired by Bibek Debroy. So, the rationale provided by the committee to set up Railway Regulatory Authority of India was that, as of now, the policy making and regulatory function are both vested within the Ministry of Railways. So, Ministry of Railways is vested with both the aspect of policy decision making and also the regulatory framework. And according to the committee, there is a clear conflict of interest because the Ministry of Railways is also the competitor for the private entities, and the Ministry of Railways is also a regulatory authority. So on this ground, the committee suggested that the private entities are apprehended because of lack of level playing field, because the Ministry of Railways, which itself is a competitor, will also act as the regulatory body. And this can lead to creation of an atmosphere of distrust and lack of confidence between the Ministry of Railways and private entities. So it says that an atmosphere of trust and confidence must be built through setting up of an independent and autonomous regulator in the form of Railway Regulatory Authority of India, where its role would be to determine whether the tariff fixed by Indian Railways are market determined and competitive, create level playing field between Indian Railways and private entities, ensure that private entities are treated on par with Indian Railways on all aspects, including access to railway infrastructure, and also to adjudicate disputes which may arise between Indian Railway and private entities. So overall, we can say that Indian Railways so far has failed to attract private sector investment, and hence going forward, Indian Railways has to address various bottlenecks and challenges because of which private sector is not keen to invest in the Indian Railways. Thus, this topic of privatization of Indian Railways becomes very important mainly from our mains perspective and gets covered under GS paper 3. With this, let's move to the next article of discussion. Now, the next news to be taken up appears in the text and context section. It says India's solar capacity, milestones and challenges. How far has India progressed on its goal to achieve 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030? And out of these 500 gigawatt of renewable energy, 300 gigawatt is to be achieved through solar energy. So the article says that what are some of the obstacles that the domestic solar industry faces. Now this article highlights about some of the key facts. It says for the year 2021, India added 10 gigawatts of solar energy. Now this itself is a 200% increase on year growth. And overall, the cumulative installed solar capacity in India has crossed 50 gigawatts. So the milestone which is to be achieved by India is to generate 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by the year 2030, out of which 300 gigawatt is to be generated through solar energy. And so far, India has been ranked as 5th in solar energy deployment. And India also contributes around 6.5% to global cumulative capacity of solar power installation. So we can understand that India is right on its target to achieve 500 gigawatts of renewable energy, out of which 300 gigawatt is to be achieved through installation of solar energy. Still, there are certain concerns also. So the first concern is that out of this 50 gigawatt solar capacity which has been installed by India, 42 gigawatt capacity which is installed are ground mounted solar panels. So these solar panels are based on grounds. Now for these we need capital investment, not only with respect to installation of solar energy but also land acquisition. And out of these 50 gigawatt, only 8 gigawatt of solar energy has been installed through rooftop solar panels. Further, in the year 2021, rooftop solar deployment has been only 6.48 gigawatt, and we can say that this falls short of the target of 2022, whereby India aims to achieve or install 40 gigawatts mainly through the rooftop solar deployment. So clearly the focus as of now is not on rooftop solar deployment. Now the benefits with respect to rooftop solar deployment is that it is very cheap as compared to large scale solar parks which are ground mounted. Further, with respect to these large scale solar parks, there are also issues of transmission and distribution losses, as these transmission and distribution losses also needs to be minimized by consuming electricity where it is generated. And for this purpose, rooftop solar deployment can be said to be one of the best alternative. So the government needs to find out ways to finance these rooftop solar deployment, as there are a number of takers not only with respect to housing societies but also the MSMEs are interested with respect to installing rooftop solar power. So the main problem so far associated with deployment of rooftop solar deployment can be said to be limited financing which is available for RTS, and even MSMEs are interested to install rooftop solar energy. Now another problem highlighted is that solar energy transmission is not supported by DISCOM by comprehensive net metering. Now net metering allows residential and commercial customers who generate their own electricity from solar power to sell the remaining electricity which they are not consuming. So net metering needs to be done comprehensively by the DISCOMs. Another problem is that the domestic manufacturing capacity of solar cells in India do not meet present demand of solar installation. And for the year 2021-22, India imported solar cells and modules worth $76.62 billion from China itself. So clearly there is a need to promote and boost domestic manufacturing of solar cells. So the question is that what needs to be done? Definitely there must be a focus on rooftop solar installation across the country. There is a need to finance smaller projects, especially the RTS projects. There must be a focus on the aspect of circular economy. Now this means that there must be provision and also infrastructure whereby recycling and reuse of photovoltaic cells which is used in the solar panels can be allowed. Now this is also because by the end of 2030, 36,400 metric tons of solar waste will be generated in India. So there needs to be a mechanism to reuse these solar waste. And with respect to reuse and recycling of solar waste, even the manufacturers should be made responsible through EPR guidelines for solar waste and recycling of such products. So these steps will help in achieving the target of 300 gigawatt of installation of solar energy. Thus this article becomes important mainly from the perspective of Indian environment under GS paper 3. With this, let's take up the question for the day. Now based on our discussion, this becomes the practice question for the day. The question is, Net metering is sometimes seen in the news in the context of promoting A. The production and use of solar energy by the households consumers. B. Use of piped natural gas in the kitchens of households. C. Installation of CNG kits in motor cars. And D. Installation of water meters in urban households. Now, this question was also asked by UPSC in 2016 prelims examination. Now, coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, consider the following statements about NBFC, microfinance institution in India. First, currently only NBFC MFI gives out microfinance loans in India. No, the statement is incorrect, as microfinance loans are given by different categories of financial institutions such as scheduled commercial banks, regional rural banks, cooperative banks, NBFCs, MFIs, trust and society, etc. Second, NBFC MFI microfinance loans are not backed by any collateral. Yes, this is true. So the question was, which of the statements given above are correct? The correct answer here was B, that is 2 only. So with this, we come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you for watching DNS.